Forgot my highlighter.
Lord, I ask that as we intentionally draw near to you these next few moments, that you will draw near to us and speak to our hearts in a fresh new way as we study your word. We also pray, God, for this at this time, for Linda and for Susan, and for the death of their sister Diane. Also pray for their brother Bruce, who is unwell. Ask, Lord, that you will comfort them in their time of bereavement. And we give God thanks for Diane's life, her work, her witness, her ministry. And now that you have called her back to yourself, Lord, we ask that you will grant her a place in your eternal kingdom. We ask for healing for Bruce and for those who will perform the surgery. We ask you, Lord, that it will be successful, that you will strengthen his faith to know and to trust that you ultimately is the healer. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
Okay, all right. Now today we're going to look at Elijah and Elisha.
You mean Alicia?
Well, you say Elisha, I say Elisha.
Yeah, it's Alicia. It's Alicia.
It's like tomato and tomato.
Right, but it's You're right, but it's Elisha.
All right, Bryce. You call him Elisha. I will call him Elisha. Okay.
Whatever.
Same difference. Same difference.
It's the same thing. I don't really care. I won't
right.
say anything to you, Father.
No, that's all right. So when we look at Elijah and I will not spend well, I will spend some time, but as you know, Elijah, we have dealt with some of Elijah already when we were dealing with Ahab, because Elijah was the prophet during King Ahab's time, which is Ahab and Jezebel. And we saw some interactions between between Ahab and Elijah previously. But one of the first things I want to say is that Elijah is seen as probably the first of the great prophets, maybe definitely one of the greatest prophets. As you will realize, you will realize that when we look at Elijah, Elijah is seen not only in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, there's touches of him mentioned, especially when it comes to when John the Baptist came on the scene, they thought that he was Elijah. And when Jesus came on the scene, they thought that he may have been Elijah.
Yeah, but Elijah already died.
And you also know that he also was with Moses on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus. And so Elijah has always been seen as the as the one who represents the prophets. The Old Testament is usually umbrellaed into the law and the prophets. We know that the Israelites used to talk about that. We know in the New Testament, Jesus came to fulfill the law and the prophets. The law symbolized by Moses and the prophets symbolized by Elijah. And we see that happening on the Mount of Transfiguration. So Elijah has always been seen as a great prophet of the northern kingdom of Israel. His name means my God is Yahweh, or the Lord is my God, is what the name Elijah means. And he's had a reputation for being one who appeared and disappeared like the wind. And as you know, Elijah is probably the only person that I can think of in the Bible besides that was translated into heaven who had not died. A chariot came and took him, and Elisha was
right. Exactly. He was the only one that was not died. You're absolutely right. He was taken up in a whirlwind.
Yep. Very true.
So he never died.
Now, Elijah was also from a place called Tishbe, Tishbe, southwest of Jezreel, which is in the north, going up into the northern part of Israel. it's one of those places where Nathaniel would have said, "Can anything good come out of Tishbe?" It's it's not a very known place. It is far removed from the center of Israelite life. Um, but that's where Elijah came from. And that's why you see in the Bible that Elijah is known, when we read, you see him as being read as Elijah the Tishbite, as it is the place from where he came. So any of you who are in New York, you maybe, who's in New York now? Anybody? Oh, like Linda. Linda's a New
Just me.
Yorker. And Bryce, you could say Bryce the New Yorker, we could refer to him in that kind of way. So that is where Elijah was from. Now, the time of when Elijah came on the scene, um, when as we know, the kingdom was once united under David and Solomon's reigns, and then it became divided afterwards. Um, um, and so when we get down to Ahab and those guys, when Elijah was on the scene, the kingdom was divided, and and um, and so uh, uh, during the reign of Ahab and Jezebel, is Elijah encountered this whole notion of the Canaanite god Baal, and who was a god of storm and rain and fertility, and as we would have read chapter 17, I believe, at some point in First Kings, you find that Elijah was faced with prophets of Baal, and 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 as well as the whole notion of Jezebel, who was very much a proponent of her gods. These were her gods, and she wanted, and as equally as Elijah was to his God Yahweh, Jezebel was to her gods, and so you will find that. Um, Amidst the turmoil that came out of it, one of the spiritual aspects or the religious aspects of the turmoil was the fact that Jezebel was a proponent and wanted to have her gods take precedence to Yahweh, and and that caused quite some problems, and obviously with Elijah it caused a lot of problems. Mm. This caused Elijah to tell Ahab that, the land, the nation will experience famine, which it does. Um, it also meant that Elijah had to go and hide himself because there were attempts on Elijah's life. And he would go and hide himself. One time he went down to a brook out of Ahab's immediate reach. And then as time will move on, he will also run again when Jezebel wanted to kill him. And you will find that the first time when he went down, he hid by a brook, and he met this woman from Zarephath. And the reason why he hid is because, you went and you tell the king that your land is going to have a severe famine. It is almost like, the king would not have wanted to hear this kind of news. And so he fled, and he went down to this brook, and he met this woman from Zarephath, a widow. And there, when he met this woman had a son, and they had very little to eat because the drought, the famine, and the drought was causing the livelihoods of people there to dissipate. And so this woman had one last morsel just to eat for her son, to cook for her son and herself. But Elijah says to her, "No, I want you to give me some food to eat first. Forget about yourself. I need you to prepare a meal for me first." And even although she had very little and she did not even had enough for her son and herself, and Elijah was asking for some, you find that she did prepare Elijah a meal, and Elijah, and from then on, she was never wanting for food. It keep flowing in abundance and abundance and abundance. As I said to the class this morning, so if I said I want a meal, feed me first before you feed yourself, and you will get abundance and abundance and abundance. So the whole notion is that they receive sustenance, that because of the person who Elijah was, his relationship with God, his faithfulness to God, his being in tune with God, that um, that God was able to multiply and increase what this woman had, and she did not have, she nor her son had to suffer. And all of that we read in 1 Kings chapter 17. Um, um, the other thing about her is that even although her son lived, eventually he did die, um, and this is where Elijah was able to bring her son back to life, and we see that in 1 Kings chapter 17 and verses 21 and 22, where Elijah stretches himself over the child 3 times and call out to the Lord, and the Lord brought him back to life. Another aspect of Elijah, and one of the things that when we get to Elisha, you will realize is that although Elijah was a very great prophet, Elisha also was almost equally as great as he is, in some cases even greater. But I mention this because there is some comparisons between the two, although Elisha was Elijah's protege, and you will see some similarities as well as some differences between them. One of the other things that we find with Elijah is when he said to the people that they needed to stop, they needed to choose between whether or not they want to worship Yahweh or they want to worship Baal. And he mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 18 and verse 21, how long will you go limping with two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And so he wanted the people to make a decision. You can't have your 2 feet straddling the two religions. You have to decide which one you want to be. And so he told Ahab that he would like their prophets to do a sacrifice, and he would also do one, and ask their God, as he will ask his God, to bring down fire to burn the sacrifice. And Ahab said, "Great, we'll do that." But as if you remember when we talked about Ahab, the 450 prophets could not get, no matter how they tried, their God would not rain down fire to burn the sacrifice. And they even went to great means of even cutting themselves, marrying themselves, and it still would not happen. And when that doesn't happen, it went into the morning, and then going into the afternoon, they realized that nothing was happening, that they were failing. Then you see that the people started shifting towards Elijah and to see what Elijah will do. And they even wanted to start repairing the broken altar of Yahweh, but Elijah was not interested in that. All he wanted was 12 stones, which represented the 12 tribes of Israel, which shows that these 12 tribes, even although at that present time they were divided, because Israel had 10 of the tribes, Judah had 2 tribes. Although they were divided, it was using these 12 stones were symbolic or symbolize that the tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes, were to be a united people, a reunited people. And so we find then that Elijah just took these 12 stones, which he used, and then he laid out his sacrifice, but he also told them to drench the whole thing in water, and he built a trench around it and told them to drench it in water, and all of that to symbolize that, it's hard for fire and water to mix. We know what water does to fire. And here is it that he just prayed to God, and God not only burned up the sacrifice, but he burned up everything that was there. He burned up all the water and all of that. And from the time that happened, you find then that the people started shifting towards Yahweh. But also, and in a sense as well, you've got to recognize that Elijah asked that the prophets be killed. And I know one of the things about that is, as far as, although that seems terrible in terms of what he did, that was in I think it is in Exodus chapter 22. I can't remember the exact, if it's Exodus 22, but in those days, if you sacrifice to another god, and you were destroyed, and that is where the whole 450 prophets were killed. It was part of the law of that day. So I know sometimes that people might think, oh, Elijah did a terrible thing by killing all these people. Why did he do that? But it was simply a law, aspect of the law that he was adhering to.
Well, now that you mention Elijah, Elijah wasn't the only one that did it. Moses did it to his people in the book of Exodus.
Yes.
Because you got to remember something. When God destroyed the 10 Commandments, and the people, and when Moses came down,
God didn't destroy the 10 Commandments.
No, Moses.
Oh,
did.
you right. Yes.
Right. Because when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, God destroyed the 10 Commandments, and that's how the people got killed in the book of Exodus. Because they wouldn't obey God.
Right, they did not obey God, and as I said, and that is correct. They did not obey God, and that was part of the consequences of not obeying God.
That's correct. Because they built a golden calf.
Correct.
Now I don't get it. I mean, like, if this happens twice, why did they do it? I mean, why did they have to? Why would the Israelites disobey God? I mean, is there a reason why they would do that? In the first book of Kings and Exodus.
The same way, Bryce, that we disobey God all the time, over and over.
Yeah, but that doesn't make sense.
But it is a human trait. That's part of our humanity. Not to say that we cannot strive to do better, but because of us being human beings.
So you're saying because of human beings, God gave us free will, so we can make mistakes again.
Yeah, because we have free will, because he gave us free will.
Right. That is why forgiveness and being contrite, being penitent is very important. That is why I say to folks, that is something that we should do every day, because we disobey God every day. And therefore, to become right with him, penitence and God's forgiveness are very important. So
it's not easy to forgive people or even forgive others when someone does something wrong. I mean, you can forgive them, but you should not forget what they did to you.
I don't know.
Well, the thing about it is, I mean, I don't want us to stray, but the thing is about it is, obviously at times it is very difficult to forget certain things. You could forgive some person, but it is sometimes obviously dependent. Hold on a minute, Bryce. Depending on what it is, it may be very difficult to forget. There's some things that we can easily, you forgive and you don't remember it anymore. But at other times it may be difficult to forget what they did. That does not, however, mean that it negates our forgiving them. But that does not mean that we forget it completely, because depending on what it is, you will probably never forget it.
Well, yeah, I don't
has
forget
come.
the Oklahoma City
Yeah.
bombing in 1995 when people got killed, but I forgive Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh when they did it as American terrorists. I forgive them, but I don't forget the tragedy or the thing that happened in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I will never forget that because that was a
Yeah.
horrible thing. That was during my spring break, and that was a horrible, rotten thing what happened.
Yes. Yeah.
Murdered.
Okay. Okay. Good. Good.
So
Okay.
no.
All right. Thank you, Bryce. Thank you. Um, the other thing is that I will I wanted to touch on too with with Elijah is that we also need to recognize how Elijah was able to um, anoint new kings for both Syria and Israel. Um, um, and he will do that. And he would also, under God's influence or God's assent, is that he will choose Elisha, anoint Elisha to take his place when he goes. And he's going to treat Elisha like a son, almost like a father-son kind of relationship, a mentoring kind of also kind of relationship. One of the things that we need to recognize about Elijah, however, is that in spite of the fact that he was very revered by the people, he was very upstanding and so forth. He was quite different to Elisha because he was more of a lone wolf. He was a loner, and he did not used to mix very well. Elijah, that is, did not used to mix very well with crowds. And you will see, whereas Elisha was more into being with the people. Another thing about Elijah is that he was he fled on a number of times. He was also depressed, and he also felt abandoned by God at times also, which again just gives you or just demonstrates humanity, that he was a human being as well. He wasn't God, he wasn't Jesus. Even Jesus felt abandoned on the cross, but he wasn't Jesus, he wasn't God. And so I think part of him feeling abandoned too was because he was a loner. He did things on his own. He focused his attention on God, and that is how um, he lived. But God was able to do things through him, um, um, uh, because his primary purpose, that Elijah primary purpose, was to get a group of people, to get the whole Israel and Judah who had been worshiping different gods, to try to get them back to serving a monotheistic God in terms of Yahweh. Yes, Susan, unmute yourself, please.
Well, did God talk? It doesn't say really God talked to him. How did he get his messages, and other things? Is an angel came down or a voice, I guess I don't know how he got his
Well,
signal.
you see, in many of those days, God will speak to the prophets directly. If you remember, for example, Jonah, God spoke to Jonah
Okay,
directly.
it didn't really say God spoke. Okay, so maybe somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, that is not to say that an angel could not come in the name of God, but God spoke to these prophets as well directly. The same way, remember, who called Samuel, who was also a prophet? God did.
Yeah.
God spoke to him directly, and even God spoke to him when he was still a kid directly. So, and one of the things that we have to, and I think this group knows this already, but was one of the things that people have difficulty with, is that they think that prophets used to be like fortune tellers, that they used to tell what they think. But no, prophets only said what God told them. They
Okay,
weren't,
so
they
I
weren't, they weren't,
understood.
they weren't fortune tellers. They weren't predicting things that they felt or some magical thing. Um, they just carried out the news that God gave them, and that's
Okay,
and that's what
I
they
didn't
did.
read that anywhere, but
Yeah,
it's assumed. Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Where am I? Mute.
And as I said earlier at the beginning, I said, that the way how Elijah, there was a saying, I don't know how true it is, but there was a saying that in the Old Testament, the way you live is the way you die. And as obviously, when you look at Jezebel, the way how she lived, and you know how she died. In the same way with Elijah, he did not die. He was translated into heaven, and did not see death. And Elijah was there to witness it. One of the things about Elijah is that to show you how much he was a loner, and I talked about him being a loner, when he even anointed Elisha to replace him, many a times he would tell Elisha, "Oh, you stay behind." He still, although he was supposed to be mentoring this man, he didn't want this man with him. He wanted the man to stay behind and he do what is it. But Elisha was very insistent that he came, and Elisha wanted to go wherever he went. Um, um, and and it made Elisha too into a better prophet, because you will realize that he becomes almost not quite the splitting image of Elijah, but when it comes to doing things, he became very similar to Elijah. One of the things that is important is that we talked about this morning too is that when Elijah before he died asked him, what gift do you want from me? And Elisha told him, I would like to have a double share of your spirit. And we read that in Second Kings chapter 2 and verse 9. He wanted to have a double share of his spirit, which is and what he was asking for was almost like an inheritance that used to be in those days given to a firstborn son, um, um, which was the equivalent of an inheritance to a firstborn son. And so Elijah gave it to him, and you will realize that when it comes to Elisha, whereas Elijah, raised one person from the dead, Elijah raised one person from the dead, Elisha raised two people from the dead, and in the Bible, there are not many people who have raised people from the dead, and Elijah. I think there was only like 4 persons, including Jesus, and
also Paul did it too.
And
Paul did it too
yeah,
in the New Testament.
yeah, and you find that Elijah and Elisha were 2 of those people who were able to raise people from the dead. So
Yeah, Jesus and Paul did it as well too,
yeah,
and so did Peter.
yeah.
So there were only 4 people. You're absolutely
Well,
right.
yeah. I think, let me see, there were, yes, I think, yeah, Peter did it, I think. I can't remember.
Paul did it.
I'm trying to think who. Let me see if I could find
Paul
who
did it
did
next
it.
to the apostles.
There were 4 or 5 people who did it. Hold one second. Let me see if I could find who did it. Which is interesting. Let me see if I can find who did it.
I know Jesus did it, Peter and Paul, and Elijah and Elisha. I think you're right. I think it was just 4. I don't think anybody else did it.
Well, yeah. Well, that's 5, but well, excluding Jesus. Let me see. I don't think. I'm trying to think if I'm not sure Paul did it. I know Peter did it.
No,
Paul did it. Paul did it in the Acts of the Apostles. I remember now. Paul did it. So it was probably about 5 of them that did it, including Jesus, because it was
Peter,
Jesus,
Paul,
it was Peter and Paul, and then
right.
Elijah and Elisha.
Yes. So that's
right. And it is interesting, right? And it is interesting that Peter and Paul and Elijah did it once, and Elisha did it twice, and Jesus, I think, did it at least 3 times.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How could you raise someone from the dead and they're already
Or
dead,
again.
even though they're going to go to resurrection and they're going to go to heaven?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, you see, though, you have to remember, Bryce, is that they were raised from the dead, but they died again. They died again, and so
So like
that's
Lazarus died again later in life.
yes.
So like
yes.
Dorothea died again.
Yeah. So Elijah raised a boy from the dead, and Elisha raised a boy and a man. In fact, not even Elisha when he was alive, it was Elisha's bones, and you'll realize that at the end, that when Elisha had already been dead and buried, and they had this funeral procession, and his body, the body of the person was put into the grave where Elisha was, and came back to life from the bones of Elisha. And then, as we know, Jesus raised a boy, he raised a girl, he raised Lazarus. Yes, he raised the widow of Nain's son. He raised Jairus's daughter, and he raised Lazarus. And then Peter raised a woman, and Paul raised a man from the dead. So yeah, those are the 5 people in the Bible who raised people from the dead. So there were 5 of them, including Jesus. So as to end up with Elijah, you will find that, as I mentioned earlier as well, that Elijah is also mentioned in the New Testament. He is well, before even in the New Testament, when it comes into Malachi, he's mentioned in Malachi, which is the last book in the Old Testament, the last prophetic book. And Malachi talks about sending Elijah to restore his people before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. And he's also mentioned in the New Testament, both Jesus and John the Baptist were associated with Elijah.
Yeah, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
And yes,
he's not mentioned in John.
No, and then also
like in Hebrews, I know he's mentioned
some. Yes,
some of the letters he's written. He was also. I think
he's mentioned throughout. Yes, he's mentioned throughout the letters as well, because of the person he was. And as I said, even some thought that Jesus was Elijah who came back to life on earth. There. Any questions about Elijah?
Nope.
No questions about Elijah?
No, not really.
So as I said, he goes down as one of the premier prophets of all times. That does not mean that he did not have some faults or that he did not have some limitation, because he was a human being. Also, too, he also felt very alone in the faith. If you remember, at one time he said that all the other prophets of Yahweh have been killed. He's the only one that remains behind. So he felt alone in the faith. He felt as if he was the only person who was fighting against these other prophets and the god of the Baals, and so it caused him to be depressed at times as a prophet, and also to feel abandoned by God as a prophet. Any no questions?
Nope.
Yes, Iris.
In 2035, a prophet condemns by the word of the Lord, one of the company of the prophets said to his companion. Now that wasn't Elijah, right? That was.
Give me your text, please.
2035.
Which this is First Kings.
1 King, yes.
First Kings 20:35.
Yes, a couple of pages on from where we are.
35. Let's
Okay,
see.
that's this morning. So company of the prophets said, so I thought they all killed the prophets. So this is more, is it? A prophet condemns Ahab. You see that? Ahab. By the word of the Lord, one of the company of the prophets said to his companion, strike me with this weapon. But he refused. So the prophet said, because you have not obeyed the Lord, do as soon as the lion will kill you. And after that, the men went away and the lion killed him. So who was that prophet then? That wasn't Elijah, right? The prophet found another man and said, he was trying to get someone to kill him, I think. So I am.
Wait, hold on a second. I'm looking at it here. I'm trying to see if I can read further up, but
But that obviously wasn't Elijah.
no, it would not have been. Hold on a minute. Let me just make sure before I say that to you.
Yeah.
This was by the word of the Lord, one of the company of the prophets said to his companion.
He's trying to get someone to kill him.
This would not have been Elijah, but at the same time, Elijah.
Because Ahab is very much in First Kings, isn't it? It's all about him, really, about Ahab. As well as Elijah. It seems that he goes all the way through things. So just a thought.
Let me just double check that because you see, Elijah condemned Ahab.
Yeah.
So that is why I am a little bit.
So that with Ahab, that prophet is really Elijah. They don't mention his name. That's why I wondered.
Yeah.
I bet it probably was Elijah.
Let's see here. Hold 1 second.
I'm reading one I thought. The invite, yeah. But anyone
I have a different translation.
Oh, do you? Mm-hmm.
And mine simply says, one of the guild prophets was prompted by the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So
it wasn't Elijah, no.
That's and you see, the thing is about it is, as I even said to the others this morning, that in those days, and you will find Elisha was more a prophet who, well, let me rephrase that. In those days, there were groups. They were not just one prophet. You remember when Elijah said that he was the only prophet left and that 100 of them that belonged to Yahweh had already died. So I want you to realize that there were not only Elijah at the time that was the prophet, or only Elisha at the time that was a prophet of God. These are the prominent ones, but there were others. There were a group of them. And but Elijah was not very much as I said, he was a loner. So he didn't used to mix up a lot with the other group of prophets. When it comes to Elisha, you will find that Elisha was more into meeting with the group of them and all of this sort of stuff, which is one of the differences between Elijah and Elisha. As I said to the others this morning, Elijah was an introvert, Elisha was an extrovert. And you see it in the way how the two were. So that and my Bible says one of the company of the prophets. So it gets the impression, obviously, that this was not Elijah, although Elijah did condemn Ahab on a number of occasions, but it appears here that this was someone else and not Elijah.
Thank you.
Just tell me again what verse you're on. You're on
that was 1 Kings chapter 20 and verse 35.
Yeah, mine says something completely different.
say something different too, right?
I'm like, that's why I couldn't
Yeah.
figure out where you were.
Yeah. What
Okay.
did yours say, Lisa?
Okay, it says, and a certain man of the sons of the prophets said to his fellow at the command of the Lord, strike me, I beg you. But the man refused to strike him.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It
And
just
if,
seemed,
and if, and
yeah.
again, if you look at it, even more importantly, look at verse 36. When you read verse 36, it says of
Yeah.
that, so the prophet said, because you have not obeyed the Lord, as soon as you leave a lion, as soon as you leave me, a lion will kill you.
Yeah.
And after the man went away, a lion found him and killed him. So, I mean, again, and what we see coming out here is this whole notion of obedience. And that in the Old Testament time, obedience was a big thing. Remember, if you remember, for the Israelites, obedience meant blessings. Disobedience meant curses. And that is something that is portrayed throughout the Old Testament. I'll come to you, Marilyn. That is portrayed throughout the Old Testament. So obedience to God was a big thing. And if you disobeyed, there was consequences for your disobedience. And that is played out throughout the Old Testament, both individually and collectively. Yes, Marilyn.
The footnote for this verse in my Bible says, sons of the prophets, an expression designating members of prophetic companies. Son is not to be understood here as a male child or descendant, but as a member of a group.
Yes, yeah. Right. They were, as I said, there were groups of prophets. Some say company, some say guild, but they were like a prophet guild where they all come together and think. But as I said, Elijah appears not to be too much a part of that kind of thing. He was more of a lone wolf, doing God's work, and he did it well. Yes, he was a human being and he had some shortcomings, but he did what he did well, and he was very revered. So much so that by the time Elijah comes along, Elijah is also well revered, but he is revered because of Elijah. Elijah helps him to be revered as well. All right, let's go into Elisha. If there's no other questions, let's go to Elisha. And I mean, since we have never touched on Elisha, we've done Elijah before with Ahab, and now we've done it again. I wanted us to read. Let me see what we. I want us to read 2 Kings. Let's read 2 Kings chapter 4. Who would like to? I think I remember this morning it had like 44 verses or something like that. Yes. So who wants to read the first 11? Bryce, I see Bryce hand. So Bryce is verse 1 to 11. Iris, you're 12 to 22. I think that should be right. Marilyn, you're 23 to 33. And who wants to read 34 to 44? Deacon. Okay. Thank you. Unmute yourself, Bryce, please.
Oh, yeah. All right. I got my own self unmuted.
Oh, that's all right.
I almost forgot. I had myself muted because I had to check some stuff for muted. I had myself muted for a little bit.
That's all right.
Okay. Chapter 4 on 2 Kings, correct?
Correct.
Okay. One of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, your servant, my husband, has died. You know that your servant feared the Lord. Now the creditor is coming to take my 2 children as his slaves. Elisha asked her, what can I do for you? Tell me what you have in the house? She said, your servant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil. Then he said, go out and borrow empty containers from all the neighborhoods. Do not get just a few. Then go and shut the door behind you and your sons, and pour oil into all the containers. See the full ones to the side. So she left. After she had shut the door behind her and her sons, they kept bringing her containers, and she kept pouring. When they were full, she said to her son, bring me another container. But he replied, there aren't any more. The oil stopped. She went and told the man of God, and he said, go sell the oil and pay your debt. You and your sons can live on the rest. One day, Elisha went to Shunem, a prominent woman who lived there, persuading him to eat some food. So whenever he passed, he stopped there to eat. Then she said to her husband, I know that the one who offered passes by her is a holy man of God. So let's make a small wall in the upper room and put a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp there for him. Whenever he comes, he can stay here. One day he came there and stopped at the upstairs room to lie down. He ordered his attendant Gizedah to call the Shunammite woman. So he called her, and she stood before him. You want me to stop?
You're at verse 11. I was looking at something else.
Yeah, I read up to verse
13 is stopped at 12.
Oh, you went, yes. Okay, go ahead. Yes. Go ahead, Iris.
Elisha said to him, tell her, you have gone to all this trouble for us. Now what can be done for you? Can we speak on your behalf to the king or the commander of the army? She replied, I have a home among my own people. What can be done for her? Elisha asked. Gehazi said, she has no son, and her husband is old. Then Elisha said, call her. So he called her, and she stood in the doorway. About this time next year, Elisha said, you will hold the son in your arms. No, my lord, she objected. Please, man of God, don't mislead your servant. But the woman became pregnant, and the next year, about that same time, she gave birth to a son, just as Elisha had told her. The child grew, and one day he went out to his father, who was with the reapers. He said to his father, my head, my head. His father told the servant, carry him to his mother. After the servant had lifted him up and carried him to his mother, the boy sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, then shut the door and went out. She called to her husband and said, please send me one of the servants and a donkey, so I can go to the man of God quickly and return.
Thank you, Iris. Marilyn?
Why go to him today? He asked. It's not the new moon or the Sabbath. It's all right, she said. She saddled the donkey and said to her servant, lead on. Don't slow down for me unless I tell you. So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When he saw her in the distance, the man of God said to his servant Gehazi, look, there is the Shunammite. Run to meet her and ask her, are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right? Everything is all right, she said. When she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came over to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She is in bitter distress. But the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why. Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? She said. Didn't I tell you, don't raise my hopes? Elisha said to Gehazi, tuck your cloak into your belt, take my staff in your hand and run. If you meet anyone, do not greet him, And if anyone greets you, do not answer. Lay my staff on the boy's face." But the child's mother said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So he got up and followed her. Gehazi went on ahead and laid the staff on the boy's face, but there was no sound or response. So Gehazi went back to meet Elisha and told him, "The boy has not awakened." When Elisha reached the house, there was the boy lying dead on his couch. He went in, shut the door on the two of them, and prayed to the Lord.
Thank you. Deacon?
Okay. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we
Yep.
can.
Okay. He got up on the bed and lay down on top of the child, putting his mouth on the boy's mouth, his eyes on the boy's eyes, his hands on the boy's hands, and as he bent over him, the child's skin grew warm. Then Elisha got down and paced back and forth in the house. Once again, he got up on the bed and bent over the boy, at which point the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha called for Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite woman." Gehazi called her, and she came to Elisha. He told her, "Pick up your son." She came and fell at his feet, face down on the ground. Then she picked up her son and left.
Hmm.
Do you want me to read
Continue,
any?
yes, to the end.
Okay. When Elisha returned to Gilgal, there was a famine in the land. A group of prophets was sitting before him. He said to his servant, "Put on the big pot and cook some stew for the prophets." So one of them went out to the field to gather plants. He found a wild vine and gathered wild gourds from it, filling his garment. He came and cut them up into the pot of stew, but no one knew what they were. The stew was served to the men, but as they started to eat it, they cried out and said, "There is death in the pot." Man of God, they couldn't eat it. Elisha said, "Get some flour." He threw it on the pot and said, "Serve the people as they can eat." At that point, there was nothing bad left in the pot. A man came from Baal Shalisha, bringing the man of God some bread from the early produce, 20 loaves of barley bread and fresh grain from his bag. Elisha said, "Give it to the people so they can eat." His servant said, "How can I feed 100 men with this?" Elisha said, "Give it to the people so they can eat. This is what the Lord says, eat, and there will be leftovers." So the servant gave the food to them. They ate and had leftovers in agreement with the Lord's word.
Thank you all very much. Thank you all. You see there, I want you, Iris, at the bottom, you see there, you hear that the Lord, Elisha says, where is it? This is what the Lord says. You see that terminology there at the end in verse 43. Elisha is saying, this is what the Lord says. So this is what the Lord has told him to do. You see there. Before we, and I should have done this before, I should have let us, and we'll come back to this chapter because this chapter is a very important chapter. But I want you, there's a couple of things, chapter 2, I want us to allude to. Who wants to read, let's see where it is, from verse, let's read from verse, right, let's read from verse 9 of chapter 2. Who wants to read that from verse 9?
Verse 9 of what? Chapter 2?
Yeah, verse 9 of chapter 2. Somebody else who hasn't read. Who wants to read? Anybody? Nobody?
George.
I'll
Oh,
read.
George. Go ahead, George. Go ahead, George. Thank you.
When they had crossed over, Elijah said to Elisha, ask for whatever I may do for you before I am taken from you. Elisha answered, may I receive a double portion of your spirit? You have asked something that is not easy, he replied. Still, if you see me taken up from you, your wish will be granted, otherwise not. As they walked on conversing, a flaming chariot and flaming horses came between them, and Elisha went up to heaven in a whirlwind. When Elisha saw it happen, he cried out, my father, Israel's chariots and drivers. But when he could no longer see him, Elisha gripped his own garment and tore it in two.
Continue.
Then he picked up Elijah's mantle, which had fallen from him, and went back and stood at the bank of the Jordan. Wielding the mantle which had fallen from Elijah, he struck the water in his turn and said, where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? When Elisha struck the water, it was divided, and he crossed over. The guild prophets in Jericho, who were on the other side, saw him and said, the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha. Then they went to meet him, bowing to the ground before him. Among your servants are 50 brave men, they said. Let them go in search of your master. Perhaps the Spirit of the Lord has carried him away to some mountain or some valley.
Stop right there. Now, thank you, George. I'll let you continue shortly. But I want you to see there, you see that is the ending part of the relationship between Elijah and Elisha, where you see Elijah's last question before he leaves to Elisha is, what do you want? And he says, let me inherit a double portion of your spirit. And then he's taken up by a chariot of fire and a whirlwind up to heaven, as it reads. And Elisha sees this happening, and he cries out. But while Elijah is going up, part of his mantle, part of his garment fell off, and Elisha was able to have it. And then you realize that when Elisha picks up Elijah's cloak, he went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. The other part of this that is interesting thus far is that we realize now Elisha starts having some powers. He was able to struck the water and divide it so that he can cross. Which again was like how Moses struck the Red Sea and was able to, the Israelites were able to cross it as well. And you see Elisha is able to do the same thing. And this is picked up as you realize, when it comes to talking about Elisha, you're going to hear a lot about the company of the prophets. You don't hear about it much as when it comes to Elijah, but you hear it a lot when it comes to Elisha, because he was more a kind of people's person and will mix with those. So you see there in verse 15 that the company of the prophets from Jericho already see what is happening, and they're already revering Elisha in the process. Yes, Susan, unmute yourself, please.
Did that cloak represent the spirit then that he passed
The
on?
cloak?
Yeah, he said he dropped
Cloak?
a.
Yes, Elijah dropped
it.
his cloak. No, it was not the
And
spirit.
Elisha,
The dropping of the cloak would have been just a symbol of like authority,
oh, I
where
thought
he's
it passed
passing
the
the
spirit.
authority on from one to the
Okay.
next. I think that would be more so what the cloak will be. It was just symbolic of
Yeah.
I'm now passing on from is now the mantle of being prophet, continuation of being a prophet of God is passing on from Elijah to
Well,
Elisha.
he got more power, so I thought he passed on his
Yeah.
double
Well,
spirit.
but
Okay.
yes, but well, that happened. But in terms of the garment dropping or the cloak falling as Elijah was ascending into heaven, I don't think has to do with the spirit itself as
I don't
much. It
mean
has to
physically,
do,
but yeah.
yeah, it has to do more, I think, with the passing on. He's passing on the mantle. He's passing on the baton, kind of thing now
Okay.
to Elisha, but more of an authority as prophet. Yes, Linda.
I noticed he addressed him as my father, my father.
Again, it shows the respect that he has for him. Remember, Elijah was an older man compared to Elisha. And so if you remember, I said their relationship at one was more like a father-son relationship. And even when Elisha said, let me inherit a double portion of your spirit, that is also symbolic of an inheritance that was given from a father to a firstborn son. So all of that is tied into it. When he would have said, "My father, my father," it is just a matter of respect for a senior prophet who was being taken from him. Yeah, but not that he was literally his father. The same way where in some translations, as someone said, when it talks about sons of the prophets, it doesn't mean that they were biological sons, but that is a group of prophets, or it's a company of prophets, or guild of prophets, as we say. You got that, Linda? Yeah. Okay. Let us continue a little bit more. Um, George, continue for me, please.
Okay. However, they kept urging him until he was embarrassed and said, send them. So they sent 50 men who searched for 3 days without finding him. When they returned to Elisha in Jericho, where they were staying, he said to them, didn't I tell you not to go? Once the inhabitants of the city complained to Elisha, the site of the city is fine indeed, as my Lord can see, but the water is bad and the land unfruitful. Bring me a new bowl, Elisha said, and put salt in it. When they had brought it to him, he went out to the spring and threw the salt into it, saying, thus says the Lord, I have purified this water. Never again shall death or miscarriage spring from it. And the water has stayed pure even to this day, just as Elisha prophesied.
Stop there, George, for me a minute. And again, you see now Elisha is performing another miracle, where he's taking the water that is bad in the community, and he is more or less healing the water, restoring it to its goodness, and 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 um, and he does this by asking him to bring him a bowl and put in salt in it. And which is quite interesting because it is almost like how we make holy water. Holy water is made from from water and salt. And here you see, because salt is a purifier. And so you see here that um, Elisha asks for a bowl, he asks to put salt in it. They brought it to him, and he throws it into the spring, and the water is restored to its to well, my translation say it was healed, um, but it was restored to its purity. So here we see here Elisha doing another miracle, and this would have been like um, when people see these kinds of things happening, you can see that this is a man of God. You can see that the power of God is working through him. Yes, Marilyn. Yes.
What was put in the stew that it wasn't good, and then Elijah put threw flour in there.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I missed that one. It would have been a poisonous gourds that
Okay.
was placed in it, and it would have been, the food would have been poisonous, and so it would have killed the people. But by putting the flour again, you see that's the miracle Elisha does, and it doesn't kill people. So that you spotted that well.
Mm.
So yes, there.
So they didn't eat very much of it then if it was poison, because they just took a
they
taste
started
and
to
then,
eat
yeah.
it. They started
Yeah.
to, and they realized, oh, something is wrong with this food, and that is when then Elisha decided to say, well, we'll put some flour in it. Whether or not the flour was what worked, I think it is the power of God that worked.
Right.
Personally, and not necessarily the flour, but but it was just again to show God at work in Elisha. Yes.
Okay.
I'm glad you saw that because I missed it. Yes, Iris.
Thing I see is the next verses. He puts a curse on the children.
Well, yes, that's what we're coming to now. We're going to read that one. We're going to read that now. I can let George finish off. Go ahead, George. Read this last section from verse 23 for me, please.
From there, Elisha went up to Bethel. While he was on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him. "Go up, bald head," they shouted. "Go up, bald head." The prophet turned and saw them, and he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore 42 of the children to pieces. From there he went to Mount Carmel, and thence he returned to Samaria.
Thank you. Here again, you see something that we will probably term as, why did this happen? Why so vicious? It seems so evil. But here it is that these boys, probably young men, jeering Elisha, calling him a baldy, and he turned on them and called down a curse on them, and the rest is history.
Where is this, Father?
This is 2 Kings chapter 2 and verse 23.
Chapter 2, verse 23?
Correct. But as I said, it is that it was probably some young men, and you have to realize where Elisha was going. He was going up to Bethel, and Bethel was a place, was a place where idolatry was very prevalent. It was in the northern kingdom. It was in Israel. Remember, the kingdoms are divided between northern is Israel, southern is Judah, and the northern kingdom, where Ahab ruled as king, had a lot of the false gods and pagan gods, and so these guys were probably coming from Bethel when they met up with Elisha as he was going there. And the other thing about it is, although they were not necessarily just teasing, they may not have necessarily be teasing Elisha, but what they were really doing is disrespecting the word of God. And that is more so what they were doing. They were disrespecting God's word. They were disrespecting God as a whole, and therefore what happened to the boys was more or less, again, another form of judgment. because they were being disobedient to God's word. Once they were worshiping idolatry and idols and false gods and all that, so pagan gods or whatever you want to call them, obviously they were not worshiping the true God. And so what happened to them being mauled by the bears is then it just shows judgment for their not believing in the true God. And also too, not even only in the true God, but also in a man of God who is bringing God's word. So yes, I think that's where that happened, why that happened. But as again, it goes back to the whole notion of disobedience. What happens when you're disobedient? Yes, Marilyn.
When a couple verses before that, where the water was bad, are we talking about a river? Or are we talking about a well?
I think it was a spring.
A spring.
Spring.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the spring. I think it was a spring. Yeah. Okay, so let's get this back to chapter 4 that we read earlier. Let's get back to chapter 4 because time is getting away. And you see here in chapter 4, well, before I say that, one of the things I should say to you that the name Elisha means God is salvation. So that's what Elisha means. He was a very powerful prophet in his own right. He was a disciple of Elijah. He was mentored by Elijah. He was like a son to Elijah.
Well, he was a student. He wasn't a son.
He was well, not biological, but
right. But he was a student. He
that
wasn't
is correct.
He wasn't his son.
And then
he was a student.
And he was also
Elijah had a student named Elisha, but he was not his son.
Okay, all right. And thank you, Bryce. And he also had he was a miracle worker.
But you're right. He was like a son to him, but he wasn't his son. You were right about that.
Correct. Thank you, Bryce. And so you had he was a miracle worker. He was he was very much involved in the company of the prophets, and he was very much a dominant figure, religious figure in Israel during that after Elijah left. The other thing is that, as I mentioned earlier too, is that Elijah and Elisha were different. Whereas Elijah was a lone wolf, Elijah was more into people and more of a prophet among the people, and not an isolated voice. He had more backing since he used to be in communion with the other prophets that were there. So he in a sense, although Elijah was very much revered, Elisha was also much revered. He was the son of a farmer. His father name I think was Saphath, and he came from I don't remember what's the name of the town he came from, but it was somewhere near the Jordan River Valley. The other thing about him is that that I wanted to, where was it that I wanted to mention something else about him, and I don't remember what it was I was going to ask, but when Elijah found him, when Elijah found him, he was actually plowing. He was doing farming at the time when Elijah called him to be a prophet. So now, when we get into chapter 4, you will find that another thing about Elisha is he was very much in tune with and had compassion for poor families. He believed in helping the poor, and that is he's revealed as a man of compassion And he brings with him the power to overcome difficulties. And you will find in chapter 4, people had difficulties, and he was able to help them in these difficulties by the grace of God, or by the help of God. And they were primarily made up of poor families. So what the first one you see is that one of the company of the prophets, one of the prophets had died in debt. His widow and children were left destitute. They were at the mercies of the creditors, and the creditors wanted to sell the children as slaves. And the widow begged Elisha for help, and they were able to save the children through a jar of oil. And you'll see that once the woman did what Elisha told her to do with the jar of oil, it will pour out valuable contents until it had filled every available container in the community. And so the oil was sold, and the creditor satisfied. And here is
that sort of reminds me in the Gospel of John that Jesus told them to fill the jars
of water.
Yes, water into wine.
Correct.
So that was sort of like the Gospel of John.
Yes,
that was the only time that ever was it mentioned. But they didn't sell anything. But it sort of reminds me of the Gospel of John.
Correct, and that is a good catch. Good catch, Bryce. Very good catch.
I mean, they didn't sell anything, but it's sort of like the Gospel of John, because that was like when water was turned into wine.
Yes.
And a lot of people said oh, how can this man turn water into wine? That's impossible. And he did. People didn't believe him, but
yes.
I mean, people at that time didn't believe Jesus. They were like, that's impossible. This guy cannot turn water into wine. And well, he did.
He did. Yeah. Thank you, Bryce. And then you see another time again. You see when there was the famine, where force again the company of the prophets in Gilgad to share Elisha's pot of stew, and you know what happened there in terms of and being saved, and they did not die. And the other one was the whole barley loaves. Again, it alludes to the story of Jesus and the 5 barley loaves feeding the 5,000 with the 5 barley loaves and the 2 fish. We see here Elisha, who is taking 20 small barley loaves, and he's miraculously feeding 100 people, and even had leftovers. And so you see these similar miracles being attributed to Jesus nearly 1,000 years later. So that is another aspect of Elisha's ministry and the gifts that God gave him. And if we didn't read that today, but if you read 2 Kings chapter 6, another interesting miracle took place there as well, where
Nahab was cured in the body of Jordan.
No, not that. Where they were going to, oh gosh, along in the Jordan River, where they were going in the Jordan River to cut down logs for the trees. And
I thought you were talking about Nahab when he was cured of a disease in the
not Naaman, not yet. And the prophet himself decided to go. Elisha decided to go, and when one of the men fell, when one of the men was when a tree was falling, the axe that he was using went into the water, disappeared to the water. And again, Elisha cut a stick and threw it into the river, the place where the tool sunk, and up came the tool. And
you're right. That was after.
Right.
That was after.
It bobbed up to the surface so that they can get back the axe that had fallen in.
Yeah, you're right, because that was after Nahab
Yeah.
Ahab was cured. That was
and it showed-
after. You're right.
And yes, that was after, correct. That was in chapter 6 of
Okay.
Second Kings. And you see again another aspect of Elisha and what he was able to do. And there were other things that he did as well. We read now in Second Kings chapter 4 that he was able to give a woman her son that and it is interesting. I was telling the others this morning, it is interesting reading this because you can hear saying, Elijah said, "Oh, I'm going to give you a son," and she was like, "Man, don't mess around with me, don't play with my head, man. Because don't tell me this, and it doesn't happen. Don't mislead me." But she did have the son. But the other thing about it is that the son also eventually died, and we see here.
Well, yeah. So did Elisha. Elisha died in chapter.
Wait, hold on. Okay, hold on, Bryce. And she was able to she doesn't even tell the husband that the son died. Son dies. First thing is, before the son dies, he cries out for his head, and instead of the father doing anything, he tells the servant, "Oh, take him to the mother. Take him to the mother." The father refused to even get involved with it. So much so that the boy dies on her lap, and then what happens is that she puts him in the room that Elisha had stayed, and decides to go and see Elisha herself. Doesn't tell the husband what she's doing. She just went. But the funny thing is that was so interesting is that when she gets there, the first person she meets is Elisha's servant, Gehazi, and he asks her if everything is all right, and she says, "Yeah, everything is all right." And she just bypasses him, and she goes to Elisha, and then she's depressed and she's emotional, and obviously she felt, "Man, Gehazi, you can't do nothing for me. I want the real deal." And you could sense that is what is happening here, and the fact that she bypasses the servant Gehazi, he even wanted to come up to her and push her away, because you tell me everything is all right. Why are you bothering my master? And Elisha tells him, leave her alone. She's in distress. And then she goes on to say what it was. And therefore, but the other thing about this is that he sends Gehazi on to do it, to heal the boy, or to raise the boy from the dead, I should say. But yet still, the woman ain't leaving. She want Elisha to come. And so she made sure that Elisha came. And it's a good thing he comes, because Gehazi can't get it done. He fails in order to raise the guy from the dead. And Elisha goes in, he lays on him. And eventually the boy comes back to life. And so we see that again, where Elisha has been given this power from God to do what he does. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in chapter 4.
No.
We talk about the death in the pot. We talked about the feeding of the 100. So all of these are miracles that he was able to do. Now, the other chapter which I wanted to focus on is chapter 5, and I know it's about 30 verses, 27 verses or something. Anyone read chapter 5? Did you all read chapter 5?
I read a little bit of it. No, I did not read any of it.
Because what chapter 5 deals with is Naaman. Let me see. What time is it now? 7? Oh gosh, it's already.
Yeah, it's 7:30. It's almost over. Class is almost over.
Yeah.
Not
Um,
over till he's done.
let's read this chapter because it is a good chapter. Who would like to? Let me see. It has 27 verses, I think. Who wants to read the first 14 and then the last 13? Okay, Bryce will read the first 14. Who wants to read the last 13? I see Linda's. Oh, I see Linda's hand before yours, Pam. Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead quickly, Bryce. Thank you.
Naaman, the commander of the army for the king of Aram, was a man important to his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord given him victory to Aram. The man was valiant warrior, but he had a skin disease. Aram had gone onto raids and brought back from the land of Israel a young girl named Naaman's wife. A young girl who served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master were with the prophets who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his skin disease." So Naaman went and told his master what the girl of the land of Israel had said. Therefore the king of Aram said, "Go, I will send you a letter with you to the king of Israel." So he went and took him 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, and it read, "When this letter comes to you, note that I have sent you my servant Nahum for you to cure him of his skin disease." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and asked, "Am I God, killing and giving life, that this man accept to me to cure a man of his skin disease? Recognize that he is the only picking a fight with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king had torn his clothes, he sent a messenger to the king. "Why have you torn your clothes? Have him come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Nahab came with the horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. Then Elisha sent him a messenger who said, "Go wash 7 times in the Jordan, and your skin will be restored, and you will be clean." But Nahab got angry and left, saying, "I was telling myself, he will surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord, his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the skin disease. Aren't Ahab and prophesy the rivers of Damascus better than all those waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash them in them and be clean?" So he turned and left in rage. But his servants approached and said to him, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do something greater thing, would you have not been done it? How much more should you do it when he only tells you, wash and be clean?" So Nahab went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, according to the command of the man of God. Then his skin was restored, and it became like the skin of a small boy, was clean.
Thank you, Bryce. Go ahead.
Boy,
Thank you, Linda.
I don't understand why Nahab was.
Hold on. Let me finish first. Okay, go ahead.
When Naaman and his attendants went back to the man of God, he stood before him and said, "Now I know there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant." The prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other God but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, then I have to bow down there also. When I bowed down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. Go in peace, Elijah said. Then Naaman had traveled some distance. Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, said, the man of God said to himself, my master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down from his chariot to meet him. Is everything all right? He asked. Everything is all right, Gehazi answered. My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing. By all means, take 2 talents, said Naaman. He urged Gehazi to accept them and then tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing. He gave them to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in the house. He sent the men away, and they left. When he went in, he stood before his master, Elisha, and asked him, he went in and stood before his master. Elisha asked him, where have you been, Gehazi? Your servant didn't go anywhere, Gehazi answered. But Elisha said to him, was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes or olive groves or vineyards or flocks and herds or male and female slaves? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and your descendants forever. When Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and his skin was leprous, and it became white as snow.
Thank you. What an interesting story here. It is a very,
Yeah,
and
I
that's
don't
why,
get it.
hold on a minute, Bryce, which is why I wanted us to read this chapter, because what you have is, well, one of the interesting things about this chapter for me is that here you have this man who is a Syrian general, this man named Naaman, who is a Syrian general, and you know, he is highly regarded, as it says. He has been victorious. He's a valiant soldier, but he has leprosy. And the thing about him having leprosy is that who are the people who are going to help him? Who's the people that really, not taking out Elisha, who is the people that really helped him to be cured of his leprosy? Yes, Bryce?
His wife and his mistress.
No.
Oh.
You read it? No. Who really helped him?
Oh, the people. The people in general helped him.
Which people?
The people in his kingdom.
Wait, I can't hear you, Iris. You unmute yourself, Iris. I'm not hearing you.
Unmute yourself, Iris.
Let me hear what Iris is saying. You haven't unmuted yourself yet, Iris?
Yeah, unmute yourself, Iris, because maybe I could have the right answer. I don't know who it is then.
You're not unmute. But unmute yourself,
you're
Iris.
on mute too.
Well, wasn't it the girl from Israel?
Say
It was
it
the
again?
girl of Israel.
The girl from Israel who told Naaman the wife.
Correct. The young
It was the girl
from
of Israel. Yeah, I couldn't think about that. You're right.
But what was she? What was she?
Slave.
A slave, a servant. It
He
is
was a
her.
slave.
It was his wife's servant who
Yes.
told him. And then, as we come further down into the chapter, he refused to carry out Elijah's wishes of what to do. And who helps him again?
His servants.
His
His
servants. His servants are the ones who are helping him. So here we have this powerful man who have these servants, and who are the ones who are guiding him? The servants, the ones that you think will be seen as least important. These are the persons that he has to take word from in order to be healed. I mean, yes, ultimately it's God through Elisha, but at the same time, these servants play an important role in the process of him going about getting healed.
But he still hesitated, and he also was very stubborn. He didn't want to
Well,
listen.
yes, that is true, Bryce. That is true. But you see, look at the servant, even his servants who said, you know, if the guy had told you to do something miraculous, would you not have done it? So why is this any different? Because you see, Naaman was looking for something that was miraculous to happen. Don't tell me just going to Jordan and lie down for 6-7 times and just go. Oh, I mean, I could go to any place. There are these other places that got rivers better than Jordan. And I mean, I will tell you this. I mean, the River Jordan in Israel is nothing to write home to mommy about, really, if you ever get to see it. But the thing about it is, so you could see why Naaman will be wondering, well, why can't I go to one of these other ones? These are better than Jordan. But Elisha said, go to Jordan, go and lie down, wash 7 times. And so he was expecting, I believe, Elisha to come to him and do something miraculous and all that sort of stuff, and that doesn't happen. And that's what we look forward to as well. We like to see something miraculously happening when we want a sign from God, and it doesn't always work out that way. So that's the first thing. So here is it that his wife's servant had to tell him to go and see Elisha, or to go to the king. And then you see these men, after he was stubborn and refused to do what Elisha told him to do, you find that his servants again told him, no, you need to do what the guy asks you to do, the man of God asks you to do. And what happens? He goes, he does it, and his skin becomes as clean like a young boy. And now he obviously realizes, oh shoot, I've just made a fool of myself by being so stubborn and not wanting to do it in the first place. And now he realizes that there's no other God in the world than in the one that is in Israel. Now, I mean, even when we look at that, except in Israel, you say that with a dose of salt, because in Israel, you know, there were still the other gods playing and intermingling. But what we mean here is that there's no other God than the true and living God. And then he wanted Elisha to take a gift from him, and Elisha refused. And it wasn't that, you know, what Elisha was doing was nothing to do about payment. You were ill. God tells me to tell you to go into Jordan River and wash 7 times. Again, that number 7. We all learn about those 7s and 40s and 12s and all of that. And so God tells him to go and wash 7 times, and he goes, and he's made whole. He's made complete again. And so you find then that Elisha doesn't want anything from him, and he goes. One other thing I will mention to you, you see it mentioned about the temple of Rimmon, which is a god, which was a pagan god of Damascus, and I think he was a god of rain and thunder or something like that. But you have just to bring that into focus, and even Naaman. Look at how Naaman is. Naaman is even asking for forgiveness even before he does it. That is important. He is asking for forgiveness even before he does it. He said, you know, I hope the Lord will forgive me. I believe that you got the true God. But, you know, I serve a master, and he can go and bow down to this God named Rimmon, and I can gotta go with him. If not, I will lose my job, or I won't be his servant anymore, his right-hand man. So please I do it because I don't really believe it anymore. You're the real deal. And that you see there happening in verses 18 and verse 18, where he talks about that. And Elisha just says to him, go in peace, and he leaves. Then you find that in the latter part of this chapter, where the servant is like, "This man Elisha doing in truth, though? You can let this man run away with all this thing that he brought, gifts that he was offering you. You refuse the man. Guess what? I go in and get something." And he waits till Elijah goes, and he runs back behind the man, and then he ends up telling two lies. He says that his master asked for stuff for two people who wasn't true. And then when he gets back to his master, he lies again to say, "I didn't go anywhere." Master, I mean, you're dealing with Elisha. He's a prophet. He knows what's going on. And so he lies a second time. And again, it goes back to that whole notion of what happens when in the Old Testament when you disobey. This is what happens. And you see what happens to him then is that the leprosy that Naaman had is now transferred to Gehazi, and Gehazi now is serving the punishment of the leprosy because of his actions. So
it's like a spoiler alert, you're saying?
Well, yes, yes. So here you have it now. Where because of what he did, that he becomes leprous, and his skin is as white as snow. Can you imagine how that must have looked? So, all right, and as I said, the last miracle that the last miracle that Elisha does is when and Elisha did not suffer the same fate as Elijah. Elijah got translated. Poor Elisha had to go to the grave. But even although he went to the grave, he was still healing people, raising people from the dead, because when there was this funeral procession, as I said earlier, passing near his grave, and there was an attack, and the mourners put the corpse down in a nearby grave, which happened to be Elisha's. He touches the bones of Elisha, and he was revived and stood up. And so the prophet gave life again, even after he had died. So you see here Elisha raising someone else again to life, who was dead. Any questions?
Nope.
Did I see your hand, Linda?
Well, it's not a question, it's just a comment.
Yes, please.
I was very amused that sets of clothing were included with gold and silver in those days.
Yes, yes.
That was a commodity. Maybe it was because they kept tearing them. I don't know, but it was kind of amusing that 10 sets of clothing was included with gold and silver.
Well, you see, the thing is about it is that, and I mean, I didn't see it say anything, but in those days when a king would have been sending a servant or one of his generals or whatever you want to call him to see another king, they would have gone with some kind of loot. I mean, if you want something from me, you gotta give me something. And the clothing in those days, probably based on the fact of the status that he brought, would have been of quite good quality. But I didn't read or hear that he gave anything to the king. But obviously, even most likely he might have, but also still had others there, and was offering it to Elisha, but he did not take it. So yeah.
All right.
All right.
Sounds great.
Next week we're looking, I think, at Ezra and Nehemiah. I think is next week. And look out! I will send you a handout, so look out for the handout as well.
So that's Ezra and Nehemiah. So we're going to skip
next week. And what I'm going to do is I'm trying and make.
So we're going to finish. I guess we're going to go into the book of Ezra, and the book of Nehemiah, correct?
Yes, yes,
So we're going to
I-
skip 2 Chronicles and we're going to skip
yes,
the end of
yes,
2 Kings.
yes, yeah. So I'm going to
Okay.
do that, and I will send you hopefully some chapters to read well in advance, so you have more time to read them. Okay.
Yep.
All right,
Okay.
Pam. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
All right,
Good night.
Good
Good
bye.
night.
night. Good night.
Bye.
See you next week.
See you next week.